Advocate Budlender.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Vetten, it strikes me, having listened to your cross-examination today, that the focus of the cross-examination is almost entirely on Ms. Mengo's conduct. And it reminds me that despite all of the legal protections that we have to protect women from sexual harassment, at the end of the day, how we as women behave is regarded as more important than how a man behaves, a man who's your superior in the workplace. In fact, the most senior judge in the province, when he demands sexual photos from you in the first WhatsApp exchange that you have with him, and persists in the face of multiple indications at you and attempts to say no. Do you have a comment on that?
That is how I read what I see here. And I think it is, again, back to some very old stereotypes around it is women who lead men on, women who don't know what they want, who say no when they mean yes, etc., etc. The scrutiny is, as you pointed out, on the complainant. It is why we eventually got around to abolishing the cautionary rule in rape cases, because again, it was, well, can we really believe her because there are all these possibilities as to why she might lie. So we have a very long history of, and it's the expression you've often had is, I felt like I was the one on trial.
Yes. And what would become clear from the cross-examination and the questions asked of you, or what becomes clear from the cross-examination and the questions asked of you, is that there is a perception that only a certain type of woman can be harassed. And that is someone who is docile, scared of standing up for themselves or speaking out. Is that correct?
I think really that's a question for argument. It's a question for argument.
No, it's not, Chair. That was specifically a series
of... It's a question for argument. It is a question for argument.
Okay. My question is based on a series of questions asked by Mr. Sikakane.
Maybe you should reframe it.
For the record, Chair, I do want to register an objection to this examination as a gross and, in fact, irresponsible mischaracterization of the cross-examination by my learned friend.
That may be the perception, but that is how I received that cross-examination as a woman.
And that is why I'm saying, people, this is a matter of argument. You can go and argue it when the time for argument comes.
Okay, let me rephrase it, Chair.
The witness has nothing to do with the views that you people are entertaining.
That you people, Chair, you mean the complainant's representatives?
Counsel. The way you see things as counsel is not necessarily the way that she sees. And the way he understands that is not necessarily the way you understand. These are matter eminently for argument.
Well, let me rephrase,
Chair. The witness to settle arguments between two counsel, please.
No, Chair, it's not an argument with me and my counsel, but with my opponents, but let me ask it differently. Is it possible, Ms. Vetten, that someone who's able to stand up for herself in one context is unable to do it in another context?
Yes, people are not necessarily consistent. And, we feel differently about different people. So some people might be more intimidating to us than others. So, you can be a lot ruder with somebody because you don't fear them, but you might fear somebody else. And I think that's the point we should always remember with people, is that we would like them to be consistent and predictable and to behave in one way all the time. And including myself in this, we are not like that. You always have to look at context, dynamics, interaction, histories.
Yes. Now, Ms. Vetten, you were asked about culture, and you are not an expert on culture.
No.
So I don't want to ask you about your interpretation of cultural practices. You are an expert on gender-based violence and the experience of gender-based violence in the South African context specifically. Is that correct? Would I be correct to say that culture in the South African context is often used as a justification for GBV and sexual harassment of women? And I don't limit that just to African culture. I'm thinking of even the idea that in South African culture, we say things like, boys will be boys.
Yes, I think we sometimes, how can we say, culture is, we all have culture. We cannot get away from it. Sometimes I think there is a tendency to speak as if only African people have culture. And I think Mr. Sikakane has made this point numerous times, the assumption that Eurocentrism, it's universal. But we all have culture. It shapes us in many ways. But the other really, really important point about culture that one can never forget is that culture is not monolithic. It's not cast in stone. It changes. It's negotiated, and it's dynamic. And you can even see that being said at the Constitutional Court, for instance, in Bay, for example, where they talk about the fluidity of culture, how it's lived. And it's those earlier points that there is what is officially said and there's what people do. And it's really important that culture always remain malleable and fluid, because otherwise we would still be living the lives of 2,000 years ago, if not older.
And in South Africa, the Constitution and our laws on sexual harassment, the code, are designed to protect all victims of harassment, irrespective of race, gender, or ethnicity. That'd be correct.
Yes, exactly, because I think one must acknowledge difference and plurality, but there's also a point where you could end up fragmenting things where you have 17 different laws to accommodate 17, 18, however many you want to proliferate. So you do need to have some, what will bind a society together is a common set of shared values. And that, I think, is what the Constitution is trying to do. And it is obviously allowing for recognition of that, of difference, but it is trying to have those common sets of shared values that we, all of us, should be.
Well, I'm not going to ask you about your interpretation of the Constitution, because you're not an expert on that. But the point I was trying to make is that the law specifically is culture neutral.
Yes.
Now, you said in your evidence under cross-examination that sometimes lines get blurred when one person's appreciation, was I think the word you used, is another person's sexual harassment. You recall that?
I do.
Now, is that perhaps why the definition of sexual harassment specifically prioritizes a subjective perception of the complainant, so that through the use of the word unwanted, for example? Could you comment on that?
Yes, it does do that. I must say, whenever I have been educating around sexual harassment, that is the area where there is always the most tension, is, yes, but I'm just appreciating somebody. Or I am just doing this, or I'm just doing that. And that's when one has to have, I think, quite robust engagement to say, well, you may be appreciating, but what is the other person's experience of it? Do they simply accept what you are saying you do, or do you listen and take their feedback as to how they are experiencing this, and they don't experience this as appreciation at all? And therefore you need to modify your conduct. If this is to be if we are to talk about human interactions as exchanges between each other where we negotiate how we are to be treated. So yes, that is why you do need to look at what is the subjective impact on somebody. That is, as far as I understand, part of the test, is to look at how does that person experience it, what do they think about it, do they feel it impairs their dignity. It is subjective.
All right. But presumably you have to weigh in on the respondent's understanding of the situation as well. It can't just simply be a one-sided evaluation.
Of course you do. And that is why I think sometimes, and there is that element, I think, of trying to think about what is reasonable, how would somebody outside the situation look at it? And so you do need to listen to, okay, so what is the respondent's understanding of what is going on? How did the respondent, if they were told to stop, what did they do? Did they listen to that? Did they find other ways to get around it? Did they leave? I mean, I'll think of an example where one ended up having to conclude there was no sexual harassment, where he'd initially expressed interest in somebody. She'd said, look, I'm not terribly certain right now, maybe, possibly some other time. So he waited 3 months and he asked her, I'm checking to see if you are interested. And she said no. And he did not ever contact her again. You cannot say that he committed sexual harassment under those circumstances. She'd left it open. He'd followed up. She said no. So in that particular matter, we had to conclude there wasn't any sexual harassment. There are also situations where I think you have to look at what does the person do. So, I mean, I'm thinking of a case we recently dealt with. People were offended by his behavior. Was it sexual harassment? No, he might be opinionated and annoying. But what he did not meet that test, did not, I think, amount to sexual harassment.
All right, I want to move on. You asked, in fact, if you can go to the 8th of June, that's page 1170, Chair. 8th of June at 9:10 in the evening, 2110.
$21.10.
2110.
Okay. Yeah.
This is the part of the WhatsApp that you asked about, where Ms. Mengo says, I wonder if I asked for money, would you give it? Now, this message comes after, so this is at 9 o'clock, 9:10 at night, and the conversation started at about 7 o'clock at night. It's the first day of their WhatsApp exchanges, the 8th of June. So this comes after about 2 hours of WhatsApps on that first night. You asked for your interpretation of that, and you described it, I'm just summarizing, as transactional. Now, what wasn't put to you is what Ms. Mengo's explanation of that statement was. Under cross-examination, although I stand to be corrected, it could have been in her evidence in chief, but her evidence was that this statement of hers was because she knew that if you asked a man for money, he would leave you alone, he would run away. And that's why she did that. Does that change your analysis of it being transactional?
No, I mean, in fact, let me see where I can. If somebody says this to you, it is repellent and crude. So I would certainly see, so if you put it in these kinds of terms, I would see it as a way of really repelling somebody. Only the most transactional person would engage with this. But to say that, it's a very crude way to say to somebody, okay, if you want to engage with me, then these are the terms on which it's going to be. And either you're going to like it, you're going to leave it. And clearly he didn't like it. And she doesn't pursue it. So that's why it also would seem to me why it would be something that is intended to be repellent.
Okay, let's talk about another instance in which Ms. Mengo said something that you were asked under cross-examination. It's at page 1229. Sorry, I'm just trying to find how I give you the reference to that. But I'll summarize it. You may be able to find it. It's the section where she said, I want you to remain greedy. So when you come to me.
Budlender, there's just one question before we carry on.
Yes, sorry.
I just want to ask Ms. Vetten, where she says, I want money, would you give it? Should you look at it from his perception as well, how he would understand it?
Yes, and he puts his answer there. He is understanding her as asking for money. And his response is life is not about money.
Thank you. The next section I wanted to go to is 23 June. So it's page 1229 of our bundle. And it's 23 June. I think it's 1948. (1946) and then 1948. So the top of the page.
Sorry, 20 June is quite a long conversation, so. I think
Sorry,
we should
in
get
the
a lot still in
evening,
there.
1946. It's 23 June.
Okay, I'm still in 21st June.
Okay.
6 June, 22. Oh, 23 June?
Okay. So you recall that conversation?
Yeah.
And that's very clearly sexual. What Ms. Mengo says there is very clearly sexual. She didn't deny that.
Yes.
Okay.
So there are a couple of examples where she is.
You asked under cross-examination if your evidence on this was limited by your not having spoken to Ms. Mengo. You recall that?
Yes.
I want to put to you what Ms. Mengo's evidence on this was and ask if it changes your answer. So she was asked about this specifically, and she said, I did not want him to have interest. I wanted to satisfy him, otherwise I would never have had rest. To satisfy him with the conversation as he is continuing with the messaging. I was still in the position where I knew he was my boss by making sure I respond to him. The courage I had in my previous messages, he was not cognizant of that or take it serious. That is why then I sought fit to let me rather respond to him, as this is the response he wants. So that was her response. Do you have any comment? Does it change your interpretation of that engagement?
No, it doesn't. I mean, I think the point I was trying to make yesterday as well was that you see her far more sexual comments and responses coming towards the later end of their engagement, not really upfront in their very first conversation. There she's like, let's do this, I will do it, the maths is wrong, you'll give me money. It's not really sexual, but it's as you get deeper into the conversation, as I said, it tapers off after 28th of July, more or less, the sexualized content. She does start making these more explicit comments. So I do read that as somebody who, in a previous session, he's asked her about, will you be intimate with me? No. Go and read the Bible. Well, what about it? No, she says, no. And then she has a picture of, honorable member, I am shocked. But he still persists. So clearly this no, the way I would understand it, is she's realizing not necessarily working. So switching to this might be another way. to try to engage, to engage, because he does persist. Even when she says no, he does continue. I mean, in various different ways. He keeps asking for photographs. She said to him, surprise me. But he still wants to continue asking about questions around sexual positions. Even when she doesn't answer in the evening, he picks it up again and wants to continue. And she says, are you still asking me about that? So if you're looking at a thread of conversations over time and how she is changing her engagement or how she's trying to adapt or figure out what's going to stop this, that would be consistent.
Yes, and it's common cause, well, you'll have seen on the WhatsApps that despite an invitation by the judge present or an attempt to meet, that Ms. Mengo did not meet with him, and it's common cause that they never did have sex.
That's right. In fact, she even says to him at one point, are you still asking about that, about the meeting in East London?
Thank you, Ms. Vetten. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Just as a general statement, I have had an advert about some of these things which says, a no is a no. What is it that you don't understand about no? You are aware of that advert?
Which part of no don't you understand? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's right. So the starting point, I'm sure, should be where it's clear a no is a no. Isn't that the starting point?
Yes.
Conversely, the starting point should be a yes is a yes.
Yes.
And nobody should second guess a woman when she says no, and nobody should second guess a woman when she says yes.
Exactly. I think the point about...
Sorry.
Oh, so sorry.
Just answer me first. What is your answer?
The yes, you need to look at the context, and I think sometimes the no as well. But that is usually, that would be your starting point. Is that you
Well,
take...
Who thinks they have got the right to second guess a woman when she says no? And who has got the right to think they must second guess a woman when she says yes? Who has got that right?
Well, I think when you... I'm going to say it in the context of violence, is again the question of...
Sorry, do you find it difficult to answer that question?
All right, put it to me again then. Do you want to put it to me again then?
No, I'm saying, maybe I should rephrase it. Does anybody has got the right to second guess a no? Does anybody has got the right to second guess a yes?
No.
Well, you answered my question. Do you want... I'm satisfied with your answer. You want to elaborate? I thought it was a simple thing.
If I may elaborate, but I mean, maybe that's unnecessary.
Sorry?
If I may elaborate, but maybe that is unnecessary.
Well, unless you want to change the no and change the yes.
No.
If you're not going to change that, then there's not necessary as far as I'm concerned, because I just asked a simple question. Actually, Mrs. Vettel, is it not precisely because we have got problems, precisely because people think they can second guess a no, and simply because people think they can second guess a yes? Isn't that precisely the point?
That is the point. Or that
Yes.
they can infer yes from conduct when they shouldn't always do that.
Well,
Like short skirts.
Anyway, I wasn't talking about conduct. I was talking about a yes.
Stated
and a
verbal,
no.
yes.
Nobody should second guess any woman, because the starting point there's the adult, they know what they want, and nobody should try to second guess their decision. They must respect it. And no is a no, a yes is a yes.
Correct.
Thank you. I don't know if somebody wants to ask questions about whether a woman's no should be respected or a woman's yes should be respected. I don't know if there's anyone who wants to answer a question about that. Ask a question.
None, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Vettel, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.